Good evening, Central. Pastor Ben here sharing tonight's devotional. One of the things that has been really apparent in these times is that there's just so much conflict all around us. And at my last church, I was teaching something in our Sunday school that was produced by Peacemaker Ministry that was called Everyday Conflict. And one of the last lessons was talking and gave a video on just conflict and how it's resolved. So I wanted to share that with us today here.
The conflicts that rage all around us can't be solved by the cross. And I do not believe I will find peace in my own life. My problems are too big for Jesus. I refuse to believe that churches can be reconciled and come to live in peace. But it's because of God we fight and quarrel. It's happening all around the world. It's what happened in Northern Ireland. Yeah, it's what happened in my church. Can people who hate each other ever come to be reconciled? The gospel doesn't change things. Only a fool believes the reckless promise of God that there's real hope in this broken world. This is what I believe. This is what I believe, that there's real hope in this broken world. The reckless promise of God. Only a fool believes the gospel doesn't change things. Can people who hate each other ever come to be reconciled? Yes, that's what happened in my church. It's what happened in Northern Ireland. It's happening all around the world. We fight and quarrel, but it's because of God. Churches can be reconciled and come to live in peace. I refuse to believe that my problems are too big for Jesus. I will find peace in my own life. And I do not believe the conflicts that rage all around us can't be solved by the cross.
What an encouraging word for us, especially in these times when we can be very similar to the first thought of how can any of these things ever happen. We just see so much chaos and hurt and hatred and pain, but then we see it can be turned completely around by Jesus and what he did on the cross, by knowing what the gospel tells us. And if we truly live by it, how it can turn our lives upside down. And that's what we saw, especially in the New Testament, when these disciples were following Jesus and they were seeing more of what he was doing and they were living it out of their lives. We see, especially in Acts, when Paul is called to go to different places and he became just like the people to be able to share in that context of who he was sharing. And he shared it out of love because he knew God loved him so much, a sinner, a person that was persecuting and hurting the church, but he wanted to share that with others, that God loved them as well and wanted to change and transform them if they would submit to him and submit to God's plan. So we see in especially Acts 17, they were going from town to town and they eventually ended in Thessalonica, and they saw God's workers doing the work, and they see a specific man named Jason being dragged out of the streets, and they say this in verse 6: these men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. And we see that the disciples are known now to be living countercultural. They're living in a way that is sharing a new way, that the king is actually Jesus, and they're living in that desire to be living in God's kingdom and building God's kingdom. And people are recognizing that this is turning the world upside down, and they're getting jealous of it. They're persecuting people for that, and they're persecuting the disciples and Jason and others for it. Paul would be beaten and driven out of many towns. And for us, as we think about what that looks like, again, on letting the gospel speak into our lives and then letting the gospel then speak into our communities, how we need to bring that message of hope and joy and of the gospel turning things around, that people can actually see that things can be different. The gospel and what Jesus does can bring reconciliation, can bring about the change that needs to happen in each of our hearts, and brings the unity that needs to be in the church. So I get very hopeful when I think about that promise that Jesus gives us and the way that we want to turn things upside down when we follow Jesus. And I'm seeing it when I go into different places in our community, especially in our city, that is just so broken and just so divisive. I'm seeing so much unity with God's people and seeing the desire to work together and find unity when we're doing ministry with Friendly Temple in the jail. when we're doing work with other churches to feed and do community, helping community, when we see the work that we're doing with refugees and seeing the refugee collaborative work together to pray and see how each of the ministries that we have in St. Louis are intersecting with each other to really love the foreigner and the sojourner in our land that are new Americans here. So as we continue to think about all the ways that we want to be turning the world upside down because we're following Jesus, may we be humble and follow Jesus's lead, and may we bless others as God has blessed us.